Have you ever talked to an AI chatbot that just made stuff up? Those could be a big problem if your company's reputation is on the line. Today, we're talking to someone who's fixing that. Yam is the CEO of Parlant. And by the way, at the time I'm recording this, Parlant is trending on GitHub as the #1 repo with over 6,000 stars. So I reached out to Yam to learn more about his story and what Parlant is, but what I got was so much more. I learned that he was a high school dropout turned tech lead turned VC-backed founder. Yet he was incredibly modest and wise. Our chat ran over 2.5 hours and I just couldn't hang out. I couldn't let him go. This is the cut down version, and I promise that if you watch until the end, you will not only learn how to build dependable AI chatbots that don't hallucinate, but also pick up a few tips to improve your life. So let's get started. Today we have Yam, CEO of Parlant. Can you give a quick intro of who you are for people that don't know you yet?
So I'm the CEO of Parlant, also kind of like tech lead, at least for the first year. Nowadays, less so. And briefly, what Parlant is an open source framework that allows you to control the behavior of AI agents, especially conversational customer-facing AI agents, so that you achieve the intended results with them. They don't hallucinate. They don't say stuff that your organization is going to regret. They just do what you expect them to do.
So can you tell me, what were you doing before you started Parlant?
Okay, so most of my life as a software developer, there were 2 jobs that I worked at for a few years. One was I was a senior architect at Microsoft Azure, working on some project related to autonomous vehicles. And then after that, I switched to a company called Apex.AI, where I also worked on a project for autonomous vehicles, specifically operating systems, hard real-time operating systems for autonomous vehicles. I was a tech lead for what's called a middleware project, which is what allows components in a car to interact with each other very, very quickly.
So you mentioned to me before that you dropped out of high school. Can you tell me about that story and how you still went ahead to work for big companies like Microsoft and becoming a tech lead?
Yeah, I don't know how much of that you could copy or try to plan ahead. I was fortunate. Basically, what happened was, I didn't do well at school, right? So it's not like I was like too smart for school or something like that. I just didn't do well. I couldn't bring myself to take it really seriously and focus. I didn't relate to much of the material. So it's not, like I said, like it wasn't for me, and there's no excuses. I would have wanted to be better at it because it would have maybe made my life a little bit simpler during that time, but I couldn't. I really couldn't. And so I dropped out. Now, having said that, ever since I was a kid, I was kind of on the computer. So I was trying to figure things out, trying to learn how to do some basic programming. When I was 12, I took like a computer technician's course. So I learned a little bit of like binary arithmetic.
When you were 12?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and my dad was a big part of that. So he actually took the course with me. He signed me onto that course. He went with me, and on the way there was like a 40-minute drive in each direction, and he would keep asking me binary arithmetic questions, puzzles the whole way, every time. And I learned a little bit about computer architecture and how the computer works, the different components and all that. I was interested in that. But again, like just really didn't do well in school in many different ways. And so finally the school was like, hey, why don't you drop out? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like it's not going anywhere. And my dad was just really asking me, like, you got to drop out already. You're wasting your time there. And as soon as I did, I should also say that by that time, I had already been into like fairly niche stuff at that time. I have a bit of a background in graphics design. That's actually what got me into programming. So when I was 14, I got into graphic design. I come from a fairly artistic family. Everybody except me, I would say.
But you did graphic design.
But not artistically.
Yeah,
I mean, I tried, like, the kid tried, but I did, oddly enough, there's a website called DeviantArt, which is
I know. Sharing your artwork.
So it's funny, like I did end up with like hundreds of thousands of page views, and I was actually the #1 top Photoshop brush maker on DeviantArt for years. I also started a graphics design forum, which reached a few thousand members. And there were some people in that forum that I really admired their artistic skill. Yeah, I had the forum. I knew a little bit of programming. I was really into Linux as a kid. So I found Linux when it wasn't cool yet.
Oh, wow.
I had something, it was called Knoppix, a special distro that these days I think nobody's probably heard of it. I would say like the early days of Debian, but definitely before Linux was cool and everybody was using it. So I really got into it. I really liked it. Then as I was like 17, I got reached out, and I was already a dropout, but some department somewhere found me and asked me if I'd be interested in working for them. And that started paving my way through this industry at a young age.
So they asked you to be an engineer for them?
Yeah, like they heard that I was a kid who really liked Linux, and they were working with Linux. They're like, why don't we give this kid a shot? And that was really nice of them. They did so, and it turned out that I knew far less than they assumed I did when I actually got there. Started working there, but after a
picked
while
it
I
up
kind of
quickly.
I got my act together. At first I didn't. At first I was like, I didn't know how to deal with the situation, and I felt very insecure. But slowly I decided I'm gonna get my act together, and that's when I really started getting into reading a lot of books. I read so many books on engineering every day. I don't know, 30% of the day I'd read into the late hours of the night just to try to prove myself and to try to justify why I'm even there. But that worked. I mean, I recommend it. You know, put effort into something, go deep, study. I think when you're kind of just making your first steps, it's good to have something like that motivating you, so that you're able to put a lot of effort into it, and that pays a lot of dividends down the line. Like I've seen throughout my career, the fact that I was able to put in like those 3 intense years of kind of getting my hands on anything I could and reading anything I could and experimenting, I think that kind of put me in the right category as a software developer
Yeah.
down the line.
Do you think it was because that company trusted you and you didn't want to fail them? That's why you worked so hard? Or what was that motivation coming from?
I mean, they were nice. The motivation was, if I don't take this chance, if I don't try to seize it, then I don't know what I will be left with.
Or what you're doing
Because
with
I
your
didn't have,
life?
yeah, like, because I didn't have that formal education, but I also cared about getting things right and doing things right. I naturally cared about that. I wanted to be good at something.
I see the
So yeah,
pattern. I see the pattern of you wanting to make sure things are good. You're making sure that things are done right. It's a very big theme in your life. I see it.
yeah, I will say that it is. I strive toward that.
Okay, so tell us more about Parlant and what it is.
We have to kind of start with the problem. People want to make AI agents today, right? And there are 2 types of AI agents. One is for automation purposes. So that'd be an agent where you tell it, hey, go do something for me, come back with the results. This would be like Manus, deep research, things like that. Then there's another type of AI agent, which is more communicative. It's basically like a conversational interface that's supposed to be much more natural and fluent and easy to use than could have been done before. And within that second type, there are 2 types. One is agents that people develop for internal purposes, which normally means that you can afford more mistakes, basically. Like if you're only serving people within your own organization, then they can understand the occasional fault. But if you're customer facing, it becomes more of a problem. And that's what we wanted to solve, because that's a very hard problem to solve. LLMs are very powerful, but they're also very, very inconsistent and unreliable statistically. And the problem is when you're customer facing, at least for some organizations, is you can't even afford to get it wrong like 0.001% of the time, at least, not depending on how wrong you're getting it. So you can get it wrong even like 2 times out of 10 if it's a small mistake. The problem with LLMs is you don't know how big the mistake is going to be. And so that's a starting point for what we wanted to solve with Parlant. I would say today, like an extraordinary amount of effort and engineering and research to just understand the problem and then find a way to handle it, to manage it. And that's basically what Parlant does. It allows you to get more control and reliability and consistency out of LLMs, which translates into your ability to create more compliant agents, customer-facing agents.
Compliant agents. Okay. What are the use cases that somebody would want to use this public-facing customer service agent that satisfied, compliance purposes? I mean, banking, what else?
Yeah, banking. We know a few people who work with governments. They're building stuff for them with Parlant. It could even be retail. If it's a very big company who don't want to end up on the news if their agent said something silly. It could be all kinds of stuff. It could be an AI agent in your car talking to you and allowing you to voice operate the vehicle. Anything where it's really important not to make the occasional huge mistake.
Gotcha. How are you able to achieve that accuracy?
Yeah, that's a really good question and a rabbit hole. But I want to start with why we even care to build something that gives you control. So, in a nutshell, my last two jobs, doing cloud architecture and then doing hard real-time operating systems for autonomous vehicles, just a small but interesting segue. In an autonomous vehicle, it's not just about the software doing what it's supposed to do, like the logic of the program working correctly. It's also about the timing of things. So if you detect a stop sign correctly, or you detect a person, God forbid, correctly, but you didn't hit the brakes quickly enough, that's a huge problem. That's what's called hard real time. It basically means that timing is part of the hard requirements for the functionality of the software product. Now, having gone from working on that to Gen AI, it's probably like the largest gap you could get in the software world in terms of control. And I looked at that and I said, how can you, so any complex software product, it's complex. You have to build it brick by brick, layer by layer. The problem is your foundations are weak, then you're building all these kind of castles in the air, and then it all falls apart. And obviously, Gen AI is so powerful that it was clear that people are going to want to build complex and powerful stuff with it, but it's just impossible to do if you can't rely on any single brick that you're laying down. And so we asked ourselves, how can we provide more control over what's happening here? How can we provide a methodology, a framework, so that people can get the results that they expect? We ended up focusing on the conversational use case with Gen AI, granted only one use case. And now we kind of started asking ourselves, so what are the problems? And that's where a lot of our research went initially. Now, to talk about the solutions that we found, let me just start with one major problem that the LLMs experience, something called attention drift. So, people will have heard that LLMs work with something called the attention mechanism or self-attention mechanism. And basically what it does is it's a statistical machine that looks at text and tries to understand, given that this appeared together with this is the meaning, and therefore this is the proper way to complete this sentence or this paragraph, etc. But what happens when you start giving the LLM a lot of input that's kind of diverse? And normally where you would see that happening is with instruction following. So you provide the LLM with instructions, but because you want to create something that can handle many different use cases, then you give it a lot of different instructions that can apply in different use cases. So maybe 90% of the time, 90% of your instructions don't currently apply to the context in which you're asking it to provide a completion. What happens there is it kind of evens out or scatters the LLM's focus. Happy to go into technical detail, but as an analogy, it kind of scatters the LLM's focus. And when it does that, then you don't know where you're going to get. Basically, you're going to get very low consistency from its outputs. So now LLMs can follow instructions, but what you need to do is you need to narrow down how many instructions you're giving them, especially if you're giving them instructions that don't currently apply, because then you're just confusing them. An LLM takes input and produces output, which means that input is the only thing that it's seeing. Like if you're thinking, here's my prompt for 1,000 use cases, you're always telling it 900 things that are irrelevant for it and just confusing it. And we ran many tests confirming this thesis, if you will. And once we confirmed it, then we started thinking about how can we improve that? How can we keep the LLM in its comfort zone where it's able to be more consistent? And we do that by narrowing down or filtering all of the instructions that you want to give it in different contexts. So I would say the cornerstone of Parlant is what we call a guideline matching or filtering mechanism that is able to pull in the right instructions at the right time. And before people assume that it's only like semantic similarity, it's really, really not. I wish it was kind of, but it's way, way more complex than that.
Yeah, it's when you get into the nitty-gritty detail that it becomes a much harder problem to solve, right? It's one thing if you want like 95% accuracy, but if you want like 99.999% accuracy, it becomes much harder, right?
Yeah, exactly. And something we like to say is it depends on what you mean by accuracy first. And again, the problem with LLMs is not just the frequency of mistakes, it's also the magnitude. So in today's LLMs, I will say the frequency of mistakes is high, fairly high. But the magnitude is pretty much boundless. And that's the real problem, more than the frequency.
I think you mentioned guideline matching. So recently I watched a YouTube video actually about either someone from OpenAI or somewhere. Somebody said that in the future, everybody is going to be spec writers, technical specs, right? Instead of vibe coding nowadays. In the future, people will have to learn this new skill of writing really good specs because you have to design what you want in a very clear and detailed way so that the AI can work with it. Would you say that the guideline matching that you mentioned, is that helping people come up with a really clear spec so then the LLMs can follow its rules more closely?
Yeah, the interesting thing is that many times the problem is not with the LLM. By that, I mean that you give it an instruction and you're unhappy with outcome. But I would say, give or take half of the time, if you actually look at what happened, the instruction was vague or misleading. Now, maybe your friend sitting right next to you would understand you, but the LLM having no context, not sitting next to you, doesn't know you, doesn't know your use case, but it does know about a trillion use cases that could give different meaning to what you just said. It becomes a problem of how do you articulate yourself in a way so as that you can trust an automated machine would take that, replicate that 10 million times and always do what you intended. And that's a communication issue.
Would you say your product is, I mean, there's definitely the tech, but is it more important to communicate with your client? Because I know that you guys open source your technology, but maybe the value add, if somebody were to work with Parlant, is actually the communication part.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there is the technology, which is enabling a lot of people. I would say in our case, we develop Parlant with what's called test-driven development, which means that pretty much every feature, every line of code in Parlant, virtually, we tested it, we ensured that it does what we think it ought to do. And in the process, that gave us a lot of experience and also disenchantment and kind of sobering up from expectations about LLMs. So we did acquire quite a bit of expertise and we're able to share that if people work with us. And that is kind of aside from the technology itself, which is open source.
So you guys are basically prompt masters, basically people who are really good at communicating to the AI in a certain way that it will get the result that you want.
I don't know if I'd say masters, but I think we're not worse than most people, let's say.
So tell me how you got good at that. How did the Parlant team get good at conversational design?
So I will say, like, there's I would distinguish between conversational design and prompting. I'm not a conversation design expert, although I have friends and advisors who are. But with prompting, how did we get good at that? It's that combination of striving for perfection and consistency and failing. It's really those two things.
I guess this is something I've always been curious about. Are shorter prompts better or are longer, more detailed prompts better? Like, is there a sweet spot that you've noticed from doing all these prompting?
Yeah, I want to kind of respond to that. It basically depends on what you define as the intended outcome. Now, if you go about it in a very kind of intuitive way, then you just want the outcome that you want, right? And then you might find statistical correlations between long prompts and short prompts, but that's not really teaching you causation. It's teaching you correlation. It's almost like superstition, I would say. That standpoint. No, I mean, I totally get it. I've been there too. But knowing what we know now, you have to start with what is the intended outcome for you. And then given that, there will be some things that you can do with prompts that will get you there and some things that will get you away from that.
I see. So this is a good tip for a lot of vibe coders out there who are watching. A lot of times vibe coding really just means, hey, I shoot it, make me a beautiful note-taking app. And it's trusting serendipity, trusting that the coding god or the vibe code god would bless you with a good product. But what you're saying is that if you actually want to design something with a purpose, something that you really want, instead of relying on whatever random chance it is, then you need to start with the outcome. And you need to pay attention to what the outcome is and then spec it down that way. Then prompt the AI to generate that result for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think vibe coding is a nice term because it kind of hints at the fact that it's not analytical. You're just kind of vibing through it. And a lot of like not being analytical means you're not putting a lot of energy into understanding what you're trying to get exactly and how the pieces add up. So if you're doing that, I think you can achieve a lot on the level of prototyping. But as soon as like there's stakes involved and you're like, this has to be correct, now you start getting into what is correct. You start having to answer those questions because you start not liking what you're seeing. And that's when you're like, I got to put more energy into this. And that's where I think vibe coding kind of shuts down. Then you go into the good old territory of analytical, like the analytical standpoint, which by the way, I think programming languages are more suited to that than English.
Why?
So there's basically a programming language.
It's more structured.
Yes, and it's there's a book I really love. It's by Fred Brooks. It's called The Mythical Man Month. It's quite famous, and it's about his experiences managing OS 360 at IBM. So it's one of the first real complex operating systems ever deployed. And he wrote a book about his insights on software development, a book of gems, really. I mean, that book really influenced me. And there's one quote of his that I really like. He says, I think one of the hardest parts about learning to program is getting used to the demand for perfection. And by that, I think he meant like, even getting a semicolon wrong is going to completely break your entire program. Even getting just one semicolon out of 10 million. And that's definitely like a paradigm shift, which vibe coders don't know about. But code languages are built to give you that level of certainty, basically. When you want certainty, then you need structures which are very unambiguous and very, very consistent. And that's exactly what programming languages are.
That ties so nicely with Parlant, because Parlant by itself is a product of structure, right? Because you need that accuracy, so it builds nicely. I guess it all lines up, like your belief ties into your product very well. It's your mission is that, hey, you want perfection. And so your belief is that for products, you need to be accurate. You're trying to provide that structure for people so that they can build real products that delivers exact results that people are intending.
Yeah, I'm becoming very self-conscious right now about my patterns.
Can you then now show us a demo of what Parlant is and what the interface looks like? And I know that you have a 3.0 coming up. Can you give us a sneak peek of what it is? What are the features? So then people who are watching these, who are programmers, who are builders, trying to build an AI agent with great accuracy can do this.
Yeah. Is it okay if I start with a documentation site? I can kind of walk you through how to even get into this world of what we call agentic behavior modeling. So let me try to share my screen here. So if you get started, one of the first things you'll see is you create your first agent. So like I said, with Parlant, it's not a generic LLM app framework. It's specifically tailored for the conversational use case. And so we've built a lot of stuff around the basic engine that improves your instruction following ability with LLMs. We've built a lot of like conversational management goodies. And one of those things is you can actually, in just like 4 or 5 lines of code, you can already have a running server with a conversational agent that works pretty well. But that's still not where the magic starts. The first point is here. You've created your agent. And now you want to start modeling its behavior. And this is just an initial taste of Parlant. When you create a guideline in Parlant, you got to give it 2 things, not just the action of what to do, but also the condition. And we make a point of separating those 2. The reason why we do that is basically to make the filtering process more efficient, but also to make you think about the intended context of your instruction, right? So if you say like, hey, be nice, random instruction, maybe you don't always want it to be nice, or offer a discount. You don't always want it to offer a discount, maybe not to anybody, just to people you like. You need to think about the intended context of your instruction, but also to allow our engine to do the filtering more effectively. Like I said, that's the very start. Let me go into something a little bit more advanced. So journeys, and I'll show you a live demo in a second. Journeys is actually in traditional AI agents, like before the time of LLMs, but also today with a lot of projects, the way they approach designing a conversation, they think of conversation as a flowchart. For example, the agent say this, and then the user or the customer will either say this, or that. It turns out, which by the way, we found through actually doing the market research extensively, but it turns out that about 90% of the time that doesn't hold. The customer is going to do something that you didn't expect them to do at that time. And when you design your conversational flows as a flowchart, then they totally break when that customer says that.
They deviate. Yeah, they're like, no.
Exactly. It's like, oh, wait a minute, what about that? Or the agent is asking the customer for something and the customer goes, wait, what is that?
Why do you need
all
that?
kinds of
Not giving it to you.
Or people will, and I've actually tried using a few agents recently because there's more of them around these days. I actually ended up having to, but you will talk about more things than the agent is designed to deal with at one time. Now, because we knew that we wanted to enable fluent modern AI conversations and not create these stencil conversations, then we knew we couldn't rigidly define conversations as a flowchart. However, a flowchart is still a good way to communicate the like the ideal happy path of the conversation. By happy path, I don't mean a conversation that's happy. It's just like the conversation that the designer had in mind from a simplistic standpoint. Now, if you look at the pros and cons of how you design conversations, on the one hand, like one end of the spectrum, you got conversations which are very rigid flowcharts, turn by turn flowcharts that rigidly anticipate what the customer is going to say, and they fail a lot. On the other extreme end of the spectrum, you got just using LLMs completely kind of like unhinged. Just a system prompt, hey, this is your task, this is what you got to do,
Do it.
go nuts. Yeah, and then it goes nuts. That's the problem. So what we try to do with Parlant is strike a middle ground between the two. Just enough structure so that the agent does what you want, but not too much structure, not too much rigidity so that the customer doesn't engage with it anymore, doesn't want to use it. That's where we came up with this concept of journeys. And what a journey is essentially a state diagram. But again, the state diagram doesn't confine the agent. It only tells it like, this is ideally what you should do. And you can work around this if you need to. And that's really, it turns out to be very effective. It was a gamble that we made, but it turns out to be very effective. And how you create journeys, just kind of briefly, is you start out, you create your journey. There's a few things you need to tell it. First, the title of the journey. This helps to kind of orientate the agent to the description to understand what you're trying to achieve here. And then just like guidelines, journeys have activation conditions. So they will only be pulled into the context when those conditions hold. And that's a response by response basis. Now you can specify one condition or multiple ones. And once the journey gets activated, then the question is what state it is at. And there you can start building your journey. So again, normal state diagram, you have states and transitions. A state is where the agent is currently on and tells the agent what to do. And a transition is telling the agent, if this happens, it's kind of like a condition.
Move. Okay.
If this happens in a conversation, then once that happens, you move there. And a transition can be conditional or non-conditional, kind of standard stuff.
Transition is kind of like if-then methods or statements.
It could be direct. It could be direct too, which means, you do this and immediately when that's done, then you kind of fall through to the step. So in this case, we had a book flight journey. We got the initial state to transition to a chat state. So to ask if they have a destination in mind. Then based on the user's response, we do different things. If they do, then we tell the agent to get the dates of travel from the customer. If they don't, then we go into a tool state to load some new data into the context so that the agent can use it. So we load popular destinations, let's say from a database, like the currently popular destinations. And from that, we transition directly without a condition to a chat state, which says recommended destination. The agent can stay on that chat state for multiple turns if it needs to. On top of that, you can see obviously there are more states, confirm details, provide ticket details, etc. And the agent can actually fast forward, skip steps. If the customer provided everything it needed, doesn't need to tediously get them to walk through the process. It can backtrack if the customer changed their mind about something or realized they said something they didn't intend to. The agent can backtrack intelligently. And another cool thing, which is really, really important in practical, real world use cases, is the agent can be on multiple journeys at the same time. Counter this with a banking agent use case where you have, let's say a user comes in, says, I found a weird transaction on my card. I don't recognize it.
Yeah.
Now the banking agent can do multiple things. It can help you lock the card, replace the card, or dispute that transaction. It can also help you do multiple of these actions. So with Parlant, you can achieve all of those depending on the use case. You can allow two journeys to activate simultaneously, or you can get the agent to do one before it goes on to do the other one. And basically all of those things to give you the control to model the agent's behavior as you want.
So the journey is basically much more flexible than the traditional chatbot flow where it's you wait for an answer and then you give an answer. This is just more flexible and then it's AI powered so that they could do a lot more. Is that how it is?
Yeah, definitely. And the old RAG chatbots, the problem with them is they're good for some use cases if the use case is very passive. By passive, I mean, the user is expected to be very active. The user is expected to be the expert who is pulling information from the agent. But many times, looking at an example such as this, like a banking agent, you want the agent to be a little bit authoritative. You want them to hold your hand, guide you through a process, tell them they're going to help you. You don't necessarily know, how the process is supposed to go. I recently needed to return an order on GoDaddy. I had no idea if it's possible how to do that. So agent there would need to be very active, tell me, I can help you with that, and here's how. So I'll give you an example, actually, a live example with a Parlant agent for a bank. This is a demo of a banking agent. This agent can help you in multiple ways. It has multiple capabilities built into it. I can come in and say, I found a weird transaction on my card. I'm not even going to fix my spelling. I need help. By the way, what you're seeing here is out of the box behavior with a Parlant server. It's going to initially give the user the experience that they're being heard. It's going to send what we call a preamble message when it needs to. It doesn't always do that. Here's the interesting thing. The agent has multiple capabilities. So here it says, would you like to dispute the transaction, lock your card, or replace it? Let me know how you'd like to proceed, and I'll assist you further. Right?
That's great. Mm-hmm.
And let's say I want to dispute it. Another thing that we've built into Parlant, as you can see, is these indicators. So you can see when the agent is thinking, when it's typing, all those things. I mean, there's so many features in it. I'm not going to be able to show everything. Now it's saying, here are your cards, choose a card, let me know which card the transaction was made from, etc. And that's basically what I mean. Like a customer could come in, say, problem, my dog chew my card. Oh no. And there you go. Anyway, so it's asking you how it can help, right? That's what I mean when I say real AI agents that are customer facing, they need to lead the conversation many times. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but you need to be able to control that. And normally you'd have a business experts behind the scenes in the organization saying, this is how you conduct these customer interactions.
Mm-hmm.
This is how you provide
approach it. Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah. And getting the LLM to precisely follow those protocols that your business experts dictate, that's the hard part. And that's where a lot of the context engineering and complexity management that Parlant is doing allows you to install dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of instructions and still get your agent to follow them consistently.
So if I am a government agency serving people using chatbots, and historically I've already outsourced it somewhere and there is a real person behind the chatting, can you just train my historical data and then design the conversational design, or do you still need to work separately with the business expert?
That's a very common question that we get, and it has an important answer. Even before we started coding, we talked to quite a few large enterprises trying to understand how they were going about things. And one of them was one of the largest banks in America. And at that time, they had actually already invested about 6 months into developing an agent in just that methodology. So training it on historical data from customer interaction. And it really led them nowhere. Now, there are multiple reasons for that. I'll tell you what I think is the better approach. So problem number one, customer interactions with human agents are not always great. Human agents often don't get things perfectly. There's a lot of turnover in human reps, call centers, stuff like that. Most of them, like tier one reps, don't do a great job. It has to go to tier two. Tier two only gets some. Obviously, that only sounds.
Send me to your manager.
Yeah, exactly. So the data is very scattered and a lot of it is low quality, which is very harmful when you're trying to train a high quality agent. That's problem number one. Problem number two is it's going to be a nightmare to clean up that data from personal information, from very circumstantial response. And the next problems you're going to face are just the technical issues, such as fine tuning is very, very hard to do. You improve your agent's ability to do one thing seemingly, but then you damage its ability to do other basic things. So all these problems. On the other hand, most enterprises who have historical data also have like dozens, if not hundreds of pages. How do you talk to customers in these scenarios? So they already have all those protocols. You actually don't really need to train on historical data.
That makes sense, yeah.
If you have a system where you can just install these guidelines and protocols, and that's pretty much what Parlant is. But you need to be able to take like dozens of instructions, if not hundreds, and let some engine take care of them. And if you do that, you can actually get a working agent, a reliable agent, like let's say with Parlant, working in a matter of days without spending a dime on training.
Okay, that makes sense, actually, now that I think about it. After I'm not the industry expert, so having you explain it makes so much more sense. And also, I think there's probably a lot of backlash for a lot of these sensitive information from customers, like banking institutions wouldn't want you to use to train. So that makes sense. As a tech lead, as somebody who's doing this business, what kind of advice would you give to people who are builders, who are engineers in this AI age? Can you share some advice or tips that have worked for you?
Yeah, Happy to. I think when so much information is much more easily accessible, you can ask a question, you can get an answer. Actually, most of the answers you're going to get from search engines, including LLMs, are going to be mediocre. They're not going to be like the real deep stuff, the insightful stuff. And so I think basically anybody working today with something that LLMs give people an edge with, you got to start asking the deeper questions. Think about your work as a craft. If you can, I mean, not everybody's in the position to do so, but if you can, then try to approach your work more as a craft. Try to understand the foundations of it. Try to, as people say these days, first principles thinking. So don't just be satisfied with superficial answers of like, this is how it's done. Ask why. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
You know, one thing that was really interesting is the other day I was taking my kids to Disneyland and I asked ChatGPT to plan me my itinerary for the day. Which attraction should I go to first? Which ride should I go on first? And ChatGPT gave me some answer. And the day of, I looked it up. The first ride it told me to go to was a 45-minute wait right when it opened. So it means that most people I think, are doing the same thing where they're looking at the same responses. So when everybody do the same thing, you might want to do something else. Like when people zik, you want to zak, right? So, but I still don't know how you can do that really well. So can you maybe share like a prompt that you like to use, like your favorite prompt when you to ask to bring out something that is not surface level?
That can be a little bit tricky. I think the way I usually use stuff like GPT is I don't do a single prompt. I start out with something superficial and then I tilt it toward the direction I want to go. I will say, I do have to admit, if it's a deep question, it's probably not going to answer it. If it's a statistically irrelevant question, it's probably not going to answer it to your satisfaction. What you can do is you can kind of figure out, kind of like understanding the spectrum. ChatGPT is a mirror of human behavior on the internet, right? And so that gives you an insight into what most people are doing. That itself gives you an insight into what works, but also what probably doesn't. Like if you look at an answer and you say, but that's not really going to work, you can actually continue to use ChatGPT in the same session to kind of validate your assumptions that there's a problem here, just to use it to bounce ideas off it, not necessarily that you're going to rely on anything that it says. But it's more like a rubber duck, what we call it in programming, right? Something to talk to so you can hear yourself, you have it in front of you, your train of thought. That's generally how I like using it versus like a single prompt that gets it to be a genius.
I see. So you ask question, but it sounds good, but not what you want. So you ask more questions to maybe help you do some research and refine your thinking, right?
Yeah. I mean, if it's a topic that's important to me, I will always ask counter questions. And at some point I realized that I've kind of taken GPT to its limit, and that's fine, but it still served the purpose.
GPT is like, stop asking me.
No, you know, when it starts going like, oh, you're absolutely right, I overlooked that, which I think sometimes it actually says when you're wrong too.
I see.
That's probably the problem with it. Also ask for references. So anything that's of consequence, you ask for reference, you actually open the pages that it links to, and you read what's actually written there. And very, very often you'll find that it really jumbled things up.
What are the top books you would recommend? What are the books that changed your life so far? Because obviously it seems like you enjoy reading a lot.
I used to read a lot. So we'll do two. One is more professionally related, and the other one is more personal. The professional one is, as I mentioned, The Mythical Man Month by Fred Brooks. Why I like that book is it doesn't teach you how to code, but it gives you a really good perspective of what it looks like to try to manage a super large scale software product from a very, very practical and pragmatic standpoint, from somebody who writes very well and very authentically and is very insightful, a very, very insightful person. The other book, I think, as like a late teenager, kind of got me looking at things a little bit differently, was Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Why would that? Do you ride motorcycle?
I don't. That book is essentially like a philosophical exposition of the author's opinions in the form of a fictional book. Or, yeah, I guess you could say a fictional book. And it goes into the definition of quality. It tries to kind of pinpoint and define what quality is and the pursuit of quality. And it's kind of philosophical, and it gets you thinking. It gets you to take things a little bit less for granted, to see kind of like the deeper aspect of some things, to ask harder questions. And that, I think that really influenced me as a teenager.
And what would you say your identity is? Like, how do you identify yourself? What kind of person are you?
That's hard for me to say. I'll tell you what I try to be. Okay? I try to be truthful. That's one thing that's really important. I try not to tell any kind of lies, including white lies. I think that really changed my quality of life at a young age when I decided to stop lying like at all. I really recommend it if people are watching and considering it. It's possible to do. It's not easy, but it's possible, and it's going to improve your life, I think. Slowly, it might be a learning curve there, and you might get into trouble, but you'll figure it out how to get yourself out of it or not get into trouble. And I think for me, being useful for somebody is really important to maintain a good mood. To have an attitude of kinship, friendship, fellowship is something that I try to develop. I again can't say that I get it right much of the time, but I know that's something that I want to develop more, and it serves me well, like it does good things for me. So those are things I try to develop, and I try not to focus too much on who I am right now, but I try to look at who I want to be.
This is great advice for people who are watching. And I mean, I don't know if there's any, high school dropout there, but you could be a high school dropout, but still do very well in your profession, still be a really good engineer. And now you have a VC-backed company selling to a large company and building an open source product that 3,000 plus GitHub stars. You could do anything, right? It's actually really inspiring.
Care about something, take it seriously, put a lot of effort into it, get to know what it's like to take something very seriously and not cut corners, go deep on something. I think that's an experience that more people should try. I don't know if today's culture really pushes us in that direction so much. So we have to take it consciously.
Yeah, because who would put in the effort to trade 3 hours of scrolling those shorts or TikTok videos versus creating and building a project like what you're doing?
Yeah, but you know what? I got to say something about this. I think I will say there's an unfortunate thing that we're being kind of like implicitly taught by today's culture is that you either enjoy life or you're like a badass machine who like doesn't give a shit about enjoyment and only works all the time and achieves results and is successful. And I think that's kind of toxic. I think it creates the wrong kind of relationship with ourselves. It's a privilege to go deep into something and ask interesting questions and understand it on a deeper level. It's satisfying. And I think it's a privilege to do that. And sometimes it only takes that switch of kind of like allowing ourselves to look at it that way. Even starting the startup, a lot of people told me it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever did. You trust me, you don't want to do that. It's going to ruin your life. Everybody's life around you. And at first I'll say like I let that affect me, and it did that for the first couple of months. And then someone gave me the advice like, Yam, why are you doing this? Why did you make this choice? Is it a choice? I said, yeah. So treat it as such. And that's really all I needed to hear. So good advice from a person.
I see. So see it as a choice. Like you chose to do this today, or you chose.
Yeah. Enjoy hardships. Hardships, challenges. If you approach them the right way, they will make you a more resilient and happier person. So you don't have to become the type of resilient person who just bottles things up and, develops a thick skin. You can develop a very thin skin, I think, but you kind of forgo protecting a lot of stuff that really isn't worthy of protecting in you, like egotistical characteristics and things like that. If you're able to say like, you know what, I'm going to give those up and I'm going to adopt more of an attitude of service, again, as much as you can. It's not easy to do many times, but you can kind of build up to it more and more over time. So every bit that you do build up, it will pay dividends. Sometimes you think something is just a little bit, an inconsequential bit that you're working on in yourself, but sometimes it's the straw that'll break the camel's back in terms of some qualities that have really been holding you back. Sometimes it's the small things that you get to do on a daily basis. You get to develop on a daily basis. And one day, the floodgates open and you're changed and you're much better for it.
But I guess what I'm wondering is earlier I talked about people scrolling TikTok videos for 3 hours and then building a project. Is you're thinking that people should be able to enjoy life and have more of a balance? They should be able to scroll TikTok if they choose to? Or what's your view on that?
I mean, I don't want to defend scrolling on TikTok. It's not, that was unintentional. I just wanted to say, because there's the thing itself, scrolling on TikTok, I'm not for it, but some people can take it to the extreme. I should just be a badass at everything and be a machine. And that's where I think you kind of get lost a little bit. And I mean, honestly, I did that for years. That's why I'm saying it, because I did it, but I had to undo a lot of it.
How do you reclaim that? Like, instead of the temporary entertainment, temporary comfort, and trading it off for like long-term building something of your own, that feeling of fulfillment.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, recognize that it is hard for you. It is hard. Like you have weaknesses, you have weak spots, and it is hard. Just coming to terms with that is sometimes not easy, because we tend to justify so many things and we tend to have so many conflicting opinions in our minds at the same time. So just organizing how you feel about something can take time. Once you're able to admit that something is not good for you, then it still is a process where you're like, why am I doing this? What am I getting out of it? Do I need to judge myself for it? Like, you can judge, sure, go ahead and judge. But before you do that, make sure you get the right answer from yourself. Why are you really doing this? And I find many times if you try to get that answer, then you will find an answer that you can actually sympathize with on a personal level. And that dissolves the judgment, the self-judgment that would have come. And when that dissolves, it's much easier to start thinking about changing something and looking for better alternatives, and asking yourself, why did I go for this? Because until you can admit to yourself that some part of you, even though you knew you kind of shouldn't, some part of you still enjoy that, until you can recognize that that part has its reason and see what that reason is, it's very hard to let go of it without remaining in a constant state of conflict with yourself.
Wow, you're like a therapist.
Lots of work. But the first thing I would say is try to get those answers from yourself. Try to be real with yourself. Spend some time with yourself. Close your eyes. Look at the ceiling. Get those answers day by day, bit by bit, work up to them. Once you have them, then there's a lot more that you can do with far less resistance, internal resistance with it, which is the hardest thing to overcome. It's the thing that's, I think, most holding us back from a lot of things.
Wow. Is this coming from the book Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance? What you learned from that book?
Maybe parts of it, yeah. And the other parts are just, doing the grinding for years on these things.
Yeah, but you're somebody who I would say in a way kind of transformed your life, because originally you were a high school dropout. Maybe you weren't sure what you're doing, but finally you were able to find your path through maybe this process of recognizing some weakness and then overcoming it.
Yeah, and it's constant. It's constant work. It's still a work in progress, and I'm happy that it is. I mean, I want to be at a higher level. The problem is you want to be somewhere you don't even know what that really is. You have to go through that process of discovery and questioning. And so, yeah, again, happy to have the privilege of having a few more breaths, hopefully a few more years, hopefully many more years, but to go through that process of fixing things inside, as I think everybody should.
It's a journey, right? It's a journey everybody should go through. Wow. Yeah. Okay, well, if you don't want to wake up one day and you're like 80 years old and feel like you haven't accomplished much in life, then Yam's advice is really valuable. Yam, thank you so much for sharing your advice and showing us Parlant. It's really great to have you here today with us.
Thank you. I appreciate the invite. Always lovely talking to you.